Again, welcome. My name is Eli Backman, Chabad Rabbi at the University of Maryland in College Park. My day is usually Monday. I swapped with Rabbi Reichik due to conflict for him. And here we go. We're continuing in our journey, as we say, through the Rambam, through all the halachot. And we are in Hilchot Tefillah, Uberchat Kohanim, the laws of davening. And we're in chapter 6. Today is Tuesday, September 15th. Perek Shishi. And the 6th chapter begins, continuing to talk about some of the laws connected to davening, as well as kind of when you can daven and things of that nature. Not so much when, but as much as what you can't do in order to miss davening due to the timing of davening and related halacha. But first we begin with an interesting halacha. Halacha Aleph. Asur lo la'adam. It is forbidden for a person la'avor acharei beit hakneset b'shah she'atzibur mispalin. It is forbidden for a person to walk by the back of the shul while people are davening. So people are sitting inside shul davening, and they're looking out the window, and they notice this fellow walking by. Why? So the Gemara explains, because people think that he's being disrespectful and he's running away from his obligation to daven. He doesn't want to daven, so he doesn't want to do tefillah with everybody, so he's off on his own. Again, as I like to say at the beginning, if there's a question related to something in the flow, please stop me. If not, we'll take questions at the end of longer discussions. Or the Rambam says there are two exceptions to that rule. Actually, more than two. The start was the first two. The exception to the rule is if he was carrying a package. Someone's in the middle of work, and someone looks out the window and sees someone schlepping a large package to work. They understand. It's not that he's running from davening and tefillah, but he's in the middle of doing something. Or let's say this shul, this Beit HaKnesset that you were standing and watching the scene, has two doors and two opposite sides. So if I see you walking by the back, I can always assume that you might still be going to the other door on the other side. The same thing. Shaharoa Omer, I'm sorry, the Rambam continues, for the person who sees the person walking will say, perhaps this fellow is going to walk around to the other door. The other door is closer to the coat room, closer to where he sits, etc. The same thing if there were two shuls, in that city. So you see a person walking, you say, oh, he's going to the other shul because that's where he likes to go. So again, we don't assume the worst about the person because there's another reason that we assume. So the Rambam continues the interesting halacha. What if he's wearing his tefillin? Then you are allowed to go by the back of the shul. Why? And even though there are none of the exceptions we mentioned above, in other words, not two doors, you're not carrying anything, there's not two shuls, there's one shul, one door, and someone looks out the window, sees you walking by wearing the tefillin. Because the tefillin show, if he's such a person who wears tefillin, he's not running from the mitzvah. Clearly, there's something else that he has to do, another mitzvah that he's running after, and he's not giving up his tefillah and his davening. Beis. Now we're talking about the person who, while they're in shul and they're together with the community. Someone who's praying together with the community, with the minyan. Should not drag on his tefillah longer than usual. Should not make it excessively long. But when you're davening by yourself, you are allowed to. And there's a number of reasons the Gemara mentions talking about this throughout, and some of it is called tircha de tzibura. You don't want to make the community wait. You don't want to make yourself look greater than everyone else. But if you're davening by yourself, that doesn't apply. So you can go ahead and daven longer. Interesting footnote is many chassidim of years past used to daven for a very, very long time. They bring down about a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, I believe it was, the third Chabad Rebbe, going back a couple hundred years, that he used to daven Shachrit so long that the minute he finished his morning prayers, it was time for the afternoon prayers. And guess what? The minute he finished his afternoon prayers, it was time for the evening prayers. He spent almost his whole day in davening. Now he has a longer story to his life, etc. But davening long is fine. And somebody once asked the Rebbe, how do you combine these two ideas? I want to daven with the minyan, be part of the community, but I want to daven longer. And the answer was to start with the community. Show that you're there, be part of the beginning. And then if you take longer off on the side on your own, that is something you can do. Here we're talking about someone who's kind of within the community as well, and not davening for those, not elongating his davening necessarily, but just dragging it on. But if a person comes after he finished his own tefillah, his own that prayer, and he wants to say more, wants to daven longer, I feel he could say the video Yom Kippur, even like the confessional prayer of Yom Kippur, the Al-Chet, which goes on for a couple of pages longer. Oh, man, the Rambam says you can say that. You can say whatever you want if it's on your own and after you've done. So I used to hear the Rambam tell something which a lot of people might be aware of because it is brought down that people do so, that if you want to add within each of the middle brachot, Shemona Esrei means 18. The Amida has 18 brachot, actually 19 today, longer story, but it has 18 brachot, 18 paragraphs of blessings, and each of these talks about something particular. And if you want to add to each one something which is similar, me'ein ha'bracha, which is similar to the topic discussed, most of you are allowed to. What does that mean? The Rambam explains this. Ketzad, how so? If somebody, God forbid, knew somebody who was not well, Mevakish alav rachamim bebrechas cholim. So when he says Rafa'inu Hashem, the paragraph about refuah, about healing, you should mention the name of this individual who's sick as much as you can. If someone needed livelihood, a sustenance, most of Tchina Bakasha, Bebrechas Hashanim. Baruch Shanim, the next bracha after Rafa'inu, is Baruch Aleinu, is the one which deals with parnasa, because in those days they were asking for the rain and the weather because it was agriculturally based. But that's the one traditionally represents sustenance, livelihood, parnasa. And if someone's in need of parnasa, that in the middle of that bracha is when they should add a little thought to themselves. According to many, it's a thought. Some have a custom of actually saying words. You might see it in some siddurim or parentheses to add in, but many just say stop and think about it for a moment. But either way, it's connected to that paragraph. Therefore, you're allowed to add it there. Each one. If there's another one that talks to you, it talks to something going on in your life, you're welcome during that paragraph to add in something. But what if you don't know which paragraph it belongs in particularly, or you just want to kind of do this generic prayer that includes everything? Do it then in the bracha of Shomei Tefillah, the last one before it say. Show that's the place to ask. Why? Shomei Tefillah is just a blessing that God should accept our prayers. So therefore, all prayers fit into that one. But the first three brachot and the last three brachot of the Amida, which are the opening and the clothing that are the same all the time, Shabbat, weekday, holiday, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they all open the same. And then the same, those ones we don't add anything into, those ones we do as is. Daven, number 4. Another Rambam starts talking more about what do you do before davening to make sure you're ready for davening. You're not allowed to eat or taste anything, or to do any kind of work. From after the dawn arises, until you pray the Shachrit, the morning prayer. You should not go find a neighbor, knock on his door, and say, "How are you today?" before you daven. Before you again pray Shacharit. And you should not go off on a journey before you pray. And all of these, the idea is the following: these are things that could turn into longer things, and you might miss the time to pray. If you sit down to grab a bite and suddenly you're still hungry, next thing you know, you're having a 3-course breakfast. Before you turn around, an hour has gone by. Maybe you missed the time for prayer. You go to knock at a friend's door. Hello is a minute. But next thing you know, it's, oh, did you hear this and that and yada, yada, yada. You know, we like the kibbutz. And before you know it, it's an hour later. Same thing on a journey. Obviously, a journey, you may get caught up in the way, and who knows what might happen. But Aval the Rambam continues, Toa v'osim malachim kedim shispalo musaf v'koda milcha. On the other hand, before musaf and before milcha, there's a difference. So it's samach mincha, but right before mincha, don't sit down to a meal. And here's the difference here. Mincha and Musa both have a longer time period. They can go for the rest of the day. Mincha will learn starts right after half day, half an hour after half day, which we'll talk about in the next verse, next paragraph, and it goes on for the rest of the day. So the punchline is that when you have an opportunity, you're not so worried about what you're going to do because you still have time to finish your kibbutzing for an hour and then go daven. But Shacharis is different because Shacharis has a little shorter time period and it's the morning, so therefore do it first. About eating before davening, as a Chabadnik, I got to tell you that Chabadniks do the exact opposite. We have a custom to have a little something to eat before Shacharit. And now with yeshiva, you start learning Chassidut at 7:30 in the morning, and you only finish at 9. And then you have gone to the mikveh probably before, so you started your day at 6:30. And you're going to sit after Chassidut, after deep philosophical understandings of your relationship between you and God. Now you're getting ready to come and you sit, you meditate on that, you're ready to start prayer. Prayers at 9:30 or 10 o'clock in yeshiva. You understand why they tell you to eat a little bit earlier, because otherwise you'll be hungry. You'll be hungry, you won't be able to concentrate, you won't be able to daven like a mensch. So they've ever quoted to people many times that it's better that you should eat and be able to have concentration. Now, eating doesn't mean sit down for a meal. That's what we're talking about. Get a meal, but you have a little coffee and a little cake. Others in halacha say you shouldn't. They're not so comfortable with that, and perhaps you should have a coffee, a black coffee, but no milk and sugar, and again, all the various things. But Chabad, the custom always is to eat, and as quoting as one of the Rebbitzins, the Rebbe's wives of a past generation, was not well. The doctor told her to eat in the morning, so she decided to be smart. So she got up earlier to daven. That way she'd be eating at the same time. And when her husband, the Rebbe, heard that, he made a comment and said, "Besser Essen fahren daven and we daven and fahren Essen." We see a play on the words in Yiddish, but it's better that you eat before davening than you daven for the intention of eating. It's not that she was rushing through her morning prayers earlier to be able to eat. And the Rebbe, her husband, told her, it's better eat a little bit, and then you can sit like a mensch, and you can daven like a mensch, and you can concentrate on all good things. But the eating before davening in any of these cases is a preparation to allow your davening, not just regular. Just eat for the fun of it. It's not what we're talking about. But that's just kind of a footnote to all of this. Hey, number 5. Once the time of Mincha Gedola comes, what is Mincha Gedola? It is what's called Mincha Gedola and Mincha Ketana. There's Mincha which we start at the beginning of the Mincha time, and then there's the later Mincha time. Mincha Gedola begins a half an hour after midday. What does midday mean? Not 12 o'clock. Midday means you take sunrise, you take sunset, and you count 12, and you divide it by 12. Sometimes an hour could be 50 minutes, sometimes an hour could be an hour and 10 minutes. It's called Sha'ud Zmaniyot. And you take 6 of those hours, and you get midday. So midday could be 12:30, midday could be 1 o'clock. Add a half an hour to that. The summer, obviously, the day is longer. So Chatzot is usually closer to 1. Winter maybe is closer to 12. And then you add a half an hour. So let's say Chatzot was 1 in the summer. 1:30 is Mincha Gedola. 6.5 of these proportional hours as the day is divided. But that time begins, the Rambam says, don't go into a bathhouse. In those days, they went to a public bathhouse. It was a whole process. Don't do that. Feel lazia, even just to kind of sweat. Many of you might remember as schwitz. You went into the schwitz. Don't even go into the schwitz. Until you have a mincha. Shema yis alev v'yibatum minatfilah. Because perhaps the schwitz, the sweat of the room, the sweat bath will so overtake you, you'll faint, and then you won't get up at time to daven. And things we said before, don't sit down to eat right before the mincha time, because even if you're eating a snack could become a meal, and next thing you know, it becomes a long thing. And not to sit down to do a judgment. If you're a judge, a bezdin, a dayan, a philippic martin, even if it's the end of the day, you just have to pass the verdict. All we can do is we're calling you together to pass the verdict. Don't do that, the Rambam says. Because perhaps somebody will refute your verdict, and you'll start debating, and next thing you know, it'll be hours later. And the Rambam continues, you should not sit in front of a barber to get a haircut. And even a regular haircut, not a big fancy design and style, but a simple haircut. Don't do. Why? Because maybe the scissors will break. And if his scissors break, you're going to be embarrassed to go out. So then he's going to have to go look for another pair of scissors. And those days everything was a bigger to do. So you might get stuck there. If you worked in a tanning house, don't go into that. Also, the process can drag on. You'll see a deficiency in some of your work. You say, oh, I got to fix this, I got to fix that. And next thing you know, so in theory, you can apply that to any job that you have that process. But what if you did? It becomes 12 and a half, and 12 becomes 1:30, and you walked into your job, your tanning house. Lo yafsik, you don't have to stop. Since mincha has so many more hours of the day, so therefore, finish what you're doing in daven. And as the commentaries point out, the Rambam is saying that originally you shouldn't start it because it's shown davening comes first and not risk it. Once you started it, we rely on you finishing it in time to still be able to daven. Clearly, if you're not able to finish it in time and it comes late and you can't daven mincha, of course you stop what you're doing in daven mincha. That's not what it's saying here. It's just saying here, in this extra 4 hours, 5 hours in the middle, you don't start, but if you started, you can continue because you'll have time to daven mincha afterwards. Now the Rambam gets a little more detailed focused here. What's the beginning of a haircut? He says, don't go and start a haircut. What's the start mean? Because again, if you started already, you can continue. What's that line? The Rambam says, when you put the cape that the barber puts on you to keep the hair off of you, as soon as you attach the cape, that's the beginning. What's the beginning of the bath? When you take off your undergarment, your underclothes. Take off your shirt, fine, you put it back on. But you take off your undergarment, that's considered the beginning of a bath. In the beginning of the working in a tanning house. When you tie your apron between your shoulders, I guess they used to have a tie on the shoulders, and the tanner would put on this big apron to stay clean. The moment you tie that up on your shoulder, that's the beginning. When is the beginning of eating a meal? A fascinating little thing here is that the Rambam says, there's the Jews who lived in Israel, the beginning of a meal is when you wash your hands to eat a meal. Well, the Jews who lived in Babylonia, from when they opened their belts. And the Rashi and the Gemara comments that the Jews of Babylonia, the style was to wear your belt really, really tight. When you sat down by the meal, you had to loosen it. Otherwise, you couldn't get any food in. You would be uncomfortable. The moment you loosen your belt, that for a Babylonian Jew is the beginning of a meal. What's the beginning of a court case? When the Dayanim will put on their talis, the Dayanim would sit with their talis, like we do in Shul today in the morning. So the moment you put that on, that's considered. But Vima Yeshua, what if they already had a whole day of court cases? So they're already sitting with their talis. As soon as one of the defendants or one of the baladinin, the people in front of them, started to plead their case, that's the beginning. Okay, so now we know that before Shacharis you shouldn't do a number of things because you don't want to miss Shacharis. As Mincha time comes, you shouldn't start all these things, but if you started, finish, and then have a Mincha. Now he continues in 7. Alpha Bishat Tfilat Arvit Rishos, even though Ma'ariv is a Rishut. It's not obligatory. Ma'ariv being the evening prayer is not as obligatory as the morning two. The morning two, Shacharit and Mincha, were based off of Karbanot, which everybody brought and had to be brought. Everybody had to bring, called the carbon Tamid. Tamid means continuously or constantly. Every day there was a morning offering and an afternoon offering. One opened the day, one closed the day of sacrifices. So Shacharit represents the morning, and Mincha represents the afternoon, evening one. Ma'ariv, on the other hand, was added later to remind us of that extra fats and things that were not able to be consumed by the altar during the day. They had the right to throw it on later at night. So Tfilat Arvit connected to that one. And it was a reshut, it was not obligatory like the carbon. They didn't always have it, only when they had it, etc. So therefore, but Arvit also includes Shema, which is obligatory, as we learned earlier, It's a different conversation, but the concept of Arvit itself is a Rishut. It's not obligatory. Therefore, but nonetheless, the Rambam says, a person shouldn't come home late at night, finished working. He comes in the door. Let me eat. I'll eat a little bit. I'm very tired. Let me drowse, sit down for a little bit and take a little doze off a little bit. And then I'll get up. I'll finish eating. I'll finish a nap. I'll daven. Don't do that. Even though it's not obligatory, don't do that. Why? Maybe you'll be overcome by your sleep. You're going to sleep the whole night. So therefore, daven first. First, either come home, daven, do tefillah darvi, do tefillah mariv, and then you can eat and drink and sleep. The Rambam says, I told you all these things before mincha you shouldn't do, the tannery and the haircut and all that. I didn't tell you anything about that before shacharit. Why? This entire decree of not starting these things only takes place before mincha. It's a common thing that in the middle of the day, you get a haircut, you go to work. Because majority of people do those things during the day. But early morning, shachar is early in the morning. It's not common to go find a barber at 6 in the morning. It's not common to go start your tanning work at 6 in the morning. So therefore, the Chachamim, the sages, did not make a decree before shacharit. Rambam continues another interesting halacha. Mishayos taken 8. Mishayos tipa Talmud Torah v'gizman tefillah. If a person was studying Torah, Osik means really involved, working. Osik is the word working in Torah. And it comes to time to daven mincha. Posik of his ball, he should stop and daven. But if Torah was his vocation, he does nothing else. He has no career, he has no job. All he does is sit all day long and learn. And this person was Osek Torah b'shas tefillah, and now it comes, he's learning, and it comes mincha time. Einer posting, do not stop your learning to daven mincha. Mitzvah Talmud Torah gedolah mitzvah tefillah, because the mitzvah of learning is greater than the mitzvah of tefillah. Now Rashi, the Gemara there continues rather in Brachos where it talks about it, says, who's Taraso Nasa? Kikon Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai v'chaver, like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Shimon ben Yochai, we know the story, was one who lived in a cave for a number of years running away from the Romans, and he sat there and that's all he did. He learned the entire day, he did nothing else. So if you're the type of person who's going to stop to go to work, you're going to stop to go get food, you're going to stop to go shopping, you have to stop your learning to go daven. But if you're a person who will never stop for anything else, all you do is learn, and you reach that type of a level, according to the Rambam, you don't need to stop to daven. And here's an interesting added note to this, that if you're working for communal affairs, it's like you're working on Divrei Torah, which means if a person is working for the community and you go to the government, and as we see already a couple of leniencies for such people, because in those days it was much stricter than even in today, and here you had an opportunity to become close to the government, to the king, to the ruler, to whomever it was, and yet you had to do something to save the community, to help the community, you can't always stop. So the Rambam says it's like learning. If that's what you do, not part-time and not a little bit, but you do this full-time, and you don't have to stop either for davening. Again, most of this does not apply to any one of us today. We all stop for many other things. Therefore, if we're stopping for many other things, we have to stop to daven as well. But if you can reach the level of that, of Shimon ben Yochai, and learning like that, then you don't have to stop to daven. Test, Eina mispala mafsik tefillah, the person who is davening should never stop his davening, shouldn't interrupt his davening. By the way, tefillah, generally speaking, about the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei here when we're talking about tefillah, but not the other parts so much. But when a person should not stop his Amidah and interrupt it, only if it's a situation where his life is in danger. If your life is in danger, you stop davening and you take care of the situation. Va'afilu melech Yisrael shayol b'shloima lo yeshivenu. And even if a Jewish king asks you, how are you? I mean, if you remember, we learned by the laws of Kriyat Shema, certain times you're allowed to answer a king, certain times you're allowed to initiate to the king. The Rambam says if a Jewish king asks you during the time of Daven Amida, do not interrupt. But a non-Jewish king, you can interrupt. Shema Yargenu. We assume a Jewish king will understand what you're doing and appreciate it, and therefore you're not at risk. A non-Jewish king won't. He says, how are you? When you stand there and you don't respond, he might get upset and kill you. Therefore, you're allowed to respond because it's a nefashas. It's a sakanas nefashas. It's a danger in your life. If you were in the middle of davening Shemona Esrei, davening your Amida, you're standing in the corner and praying. Melech guy, you see this non-Jewish king, or anas, or a tyrant. Bar Kenegda is walking towards you. Yikser, you should try to shorten and say quickly as you can to finish. If you can't finish, you're too far in, you're too close to the beginning, or whatever, then you should interrupt because we're worried about this tyrant or this non-Jewish king. If you see snakes and scorpions making their way towards you, they're slithering over to you. As they come towards you and they're about to reach you, and you know that these snakes and these scorpions are ones that will endanger your life. They have the poison to kill you. They have the bite, etc. You stop and you run away. If they're not going to kill you, they may scare you, then you don't interrupt because your life's not endangered. So the theme of 9 is if your life's endangered, or even you think it's going to be endangered, you're allowed to stop. If it's not endangered, you shouldn't stop. And finally, number 10, the Rambam finishes, women and slaves and minors, children, are obligated to pray. And as many commentators highlighted, if you remember in the very first chapter, the Rambam says that the prayer Minat Torah is just at some point during the day, the obligation. You should stop and pray at some point. Therefore, it's not time-bound. If it's not time-bound, women are obligated. If women are obligated, they have to do at least a short prayer of some sort during the day. And as anybody who's exempt from Kriya Shema, it will also be exempt from the Amida, and those laws we learned earlier. And whoever is accompanying a dead body to bury it, you're at a funeral procession. And even though if you're not literally carrying the coffin, Peturim in Atfila is exempt from the Amida. Now, generally speaking, we don't apply that today. We work around funerals around times, but in a situation where the only time they could go was during the time of Mincha, and instead of Daven Mincha, you should be malva, you should escort the dead body, even if you're not literally carrying the coffin. Obviously, if you're carrying the coffin, it's a mitzvah to bury the body, you have to go forward. But even if it's not, the Rambam says you still are patur from tefillah, you still are not obligated to daven, but you should go towards the funeral. And with that, we technically finished, with that, we finished the chapter of Perek Vav. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than welcome to take them.